Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I can't pinpoint the exact moment it all began, but I wasn't completely in the dark. 14 years together gives you a sense of the subtle shifts. With Amelia, it started off quietly. She began to drift, little by little. First, she skipped our usual Friday dinners. Then she started forgetting minor things, like how I took my coffee or her "I love you" became less certain. At first, I shrugged it off as just life. People hit rough patches, work gets overwhelming, and, if I'm being honest, I hadn't been the most attentive husband either. But soon, the changes were impossible to brush aside. Late nights became her new routine, always explained away by work obligations or client meetings that ran over. I tried to rationalize it at first, but it wasn't her schedule that truly got to me. It was the phone. She was glued to it constantly. The second it chimed, she was on it, swiping before I could even ask who it was. When I'd walk in and catch her messaging someone, she wouldn't even try to hide her discomfort. Her eyes would barely meet mine before she quickly hid the phone beneath her or left the room. I chose to ignore it, telling myself over and over that I was just imagining things. But that uneasy feeling in my gut kept growing stronger. Every time she smiled at her screen, staying on it a bit too long, the knot in my stomach tightened. One evening she slipped up. She left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter, its screen glowing with a notification. I knew right then that everything was about to change. My hands shook as I picked it up, scrolling through her messages while she was upstairs, oblivious. It didn't take long to confirm my worst fears. The evidence wasn't hidden deep in her conversations. It was right there, glaringly obvious, as if she thought I'd never look. There they were, Tom, Jake, Rick. The same guys I spent weekends with, laughing, building memories, trusting. Now their messages to my wife stared back at me, vulgar and explicit. Tom's were the worst, arrogant and shameless. He bragged about their encounters, acting as though he'd taken something of mine without a second thought. "Can't wait for Thursday. Last time was insane. Didn't think you could handle all of us." That was Tom, cocky as ever. Jake's tone was just as casual, like this was normal for them. "I've got dibs on the backyard this time," as if they were picking seats at a dinner table. And Rick? He didn't even use words. Just sent a picture of his junk, like some clueless teenager. I stood there, frozen, the phone in my hand, my chest tight with every breath. A part of me desperately searched for some kind of explanation, something that would make this all a bad misunderstanding. But the more I read, the worse it got. Amelia wasn't some bystander in this. She was in the thick of it, encouraging them, teasing them. "Miss you guys. Can't wait to feel you again," she had written. This wasn't happening in some distant place. It was right here, in our home, in our bed. I couldn't keep reading. It was too much to bear. But I didn't explode. I didn't throw the phone or scream. That's not how I handle things when my world falls apart. Instead, the rage came slowly, creeping through me like ice. It moved up my spine, spread through my limbs until it filled every muscle, every breath. But the colder that anger became, the clearer my thoughts were. I didn't want a chaotic outburst of revenge. No, I wanted something deliberate, something planned. After all, I wasn't the one who had destroyed us. I never asked for those scumbags to force their way into my life, to invade my marriage. But now, they were going to pay for their arrogance. That was when the plan fell into place, cold, calculated, and flawless. The night after, Amelia casually mentioned a late dinner with some clients. I did what I always did. Gave her a kiss on the cheek, pretending like nothing was wrong, and told her I'd be spending the night at a friend's place. Of course, it was all a lie. The moment she left, I made my way to the garage. There it was, industrial-strength glue I had bought long ago for a project I never got around to. Now, it would have a far more creative use. I carried the glue upstairs, making sure to move with purpose, ensuring that nothing would seem out of the ordinary. My first task was setting up the cameras. I wasn't about to miss a single detail. Carefully, I positioned the cameras around the bed, making sure they captured every angle. Soon, I'd have all the evidence I needed, even if they were blissfully unaware. Then came the glue. I worked methodically, spreading the thick adhesive along the bed frame, under the sheets, and across the headboard. As I applied it, I imagined their smug faces, how they'd look when they realized what was happening. The idea of them stuck in the middle of their disgusting act, panicked and exposed, made me almost chuckle. They'd be trapped, unable to move. The following night, I sat in my car, parked just down the street. My engine was off, the only sound being my steady, shallow breathing. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But I wasn't going to lose control. Not now. Patience. I had waited too long for this moment to make a mistake. Right at 10 p.m., I saw the headlights. Tom's old rust bucket pulled into the driveway just like every other time. A few minutes later, Jake and Rick arrived, as casual as ever. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The three of them swaggered up to my front door, laughing like they were untouchable, as if they owned the place. They walked inside with no hesitation, completely unaware that tonight would be very different. They had no idea they were stepping into a carefully laid trap. I took a deep breath, calming myself, and then slipped out of the car, moving quietly up the driveway, my eyes locked on the front door. The downstairs lights were off, just as I expected. Everything was happening upstairs. I entered the house as silently as a shadow, the only sound being the faint moans and grunts drifting down from the bedroom. I knew what I would find, but hearing it with my own ears made my stomach churn. Their noises of pleasure felt like daggers twisting in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. Step by step, I crept up the stairs, silent and deliberate. The door to the bedroom was open just enough for me to see what was happening. My heart raced as I took in the scene. There was Amelia, my wife, being degraded in the worst way imaginable. It was obscene, but this wasn't some twisted fantasy. This was my reality. It was happening in my house, my home. Fury boiled up inside me, my vision blurred with red. Every part of me screamed to burst through the door and end it right then and there. But I didn't. I held back. I wasn't prepared for what was coming. Not yet. Instead, I turned back toward the hallway, where the bucket I had left waited, mocking me in its stillness. I had witnessed more than enough. Far too much. The bucket, which had seemed light before, now felt like a heavy weight in my grasp, dragging me down with it. With deliberate, silent steps, I made my way toward the door, my boots barely brushing the hardwood floor. Their sounds reached me, laughter mixed with moans, the kind of noise that haunts your mind, refusing to let go, like a song you can't stop hearing. I didn't give myself time to hesitate. My hand gripped the door handle, and with one firm motion I shoved it open. "What the hell?" was all Tom could get out before the bucket's contents exploded into the room. A thick, sticky substance sprayed everywhere, smacking into their tangled bodies and silencing them instantly. Chaos erupted, like a bomb had gone off, turning the scene into pure pandemonium. Amelia let out a muffled, panicked scream as she twisted in the mess, but it was too late. The glue had already started to harden, trapping her along with the three fools she had chosen to humiliate herself with in their depraved positions. Tom's face twisted from shock to pure terror. "Michael, you son of a—" Jake, his voice filled with frustration, cursed through clenched teeth as he tried to pull himself away from Amelia. But the glue was relentless, too quick, far too quick. The harder they fought, the worse it became. "Damn it! I can't! I'm stuck!" Tom was thrashing wildly, but it didn't make a difference. He was glued in place, trapped inside her like he had been welded there. Jake wasn't faring any better. His teeth gritted as he tried in vain to pry his own body free. Rick? Rick was in the worst position of all. "Jesus Christ!" Jake shouted. "What the hell did you do, man?" I just stood there, arms crossed, unfazed by their panic. Their naked bodies writhed and flailed, every movement entangling them further in the glue's grip. Tom grunted, sweat dripping down his forehead as he fought with all his strength to break free. Amelia's wide, frantic eyes met mine. She gagged again on Rick's banana still lodged in her throat, a muffled cry escaping her lips. Her hair, once neatly styled, was now stuck in clumps to the bed, glued to her back. The pristine image she once presented had crumbled into a grotesque disaster. I remained motionless, arms folded, feeling an odd sense of release, as though a burden I had carried for too long had finally lifted from my shoulders. They continued to struggle, but it was futile. Tom's face turned a deep shade of red, veins bulging as he strained against his restraints. Jake, still muttering in disbelief, gasped, "This isn't what it looks like." As if that even mattered at this point. Rick stared at me, wide-eyed, frozen in shock, like a deer caught in headlights. I had always thought he was smarter than this. Clearly I had been wrong, but it wasn't about them. Amelia was the one who mattered. Her wide, terrified eyes darted between me and the others, her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come at first. I didn't care what she had to say. A cold satisfaction settled deep in my chest, like ice spreading through dark water. "You bastard!" she finally managed to choke out, her voice weak as she squirmed against the glue that had her naked and vulnerable on the bed. I just stared, watching her drown in her own helplessness. "Michael, please, let us go," she pleaded, her voice shaking now, thick with fear. But I didn't even acknowledge her. I calmly pulled out my phone, her desperate words falling on deaf ears as if they meant nothing at all. The moment her treachery came to light, it was as if a bomb had detonated, chaos and destruction in its wake. But now, all of it felt distant, like static in the background. The monotonous sound of the dial tone droned in my ear, and for a second I hoped none of the wives would pick up. Maybe Lisa, who had always been emotionally aloof, would let it go to voicemail. When the line connected, I said her name, flat and devoid of any emotion. No pretense, no warmth. "Mandy," I said, my voice cold. "You need to come over." "Michael, what's happening?" Her confusion was clear. She had no clue what was in store. Tom must have kept her in the dark about tonight. "Just come. Tom's here. You're going to want to see this." I didn't wait for her to ask the inevitable flood of questions. I hung up and dialed the next number. Amelia picked up, her voice immediately filled with panic. "Michael, what are you doing?" she begged. But I was unshaken, more composed than I had been in a long time. I finally had the advantage. "Lisa, Jake's at my place," I said, my voice eerily calm. "If he means anything to you, show up now." By the time I made my way to Karen's number, the scene upstairs had turned into something absurd. Tangled limbs, sweat-drenched and frantic, they were still trying to pull themselves apart. They thought they could talk their way out of it. Idiots. I made my last call and slid the phone into my pocket, taking a moment to watch the spectacle they had become. "That's it?" Rick rasped, his voice cracking. "You're just going to stand there and call our wives like some kind of lunatic?" "Exactly," I said without hesitation. They hadn't yet grasped what was about to unfold, but that didn't concern me. They would soon. I went downstairs and waited, each tick of the clock marking the countdown to their ruin. It didn't take long. Within 15 minutes of the calls, I heard the screech of tires pulling up outside. First Mandy, then Lisa. Karen wouldn't be far behind. Their footsteps pounded through the house, voices rising in confusion. "Michael?" Mandy's voice echoed down the hall. "Where are you?" I didn't move. They would find their way. Upstairs, where everything had already gone to hell. I listened as they climbed the stairs, one after the other. I didn't make a sound. This was their scene now. The silence that followed once they reached the top floor was suffocating. I could see it in my mind like a warped photograph. Their bodies a tangled mess on the bed, a grotesque tableau of deceit. Then the shouting began. "What the hell is this? Oh my God!" Lisa's voice sliced through the tension, her rage focused entirely on Jake. "You moron! How could you do this?" But Mandy was the first to act. She stormed toward Tom, her face contorted with fury. Her hand came down hard, the slap reverberating through the room, leaving a fiery red mark on his cheek. Tom tried to speak, his mouth moving but producing nothing more than gasps. "You worthless piece of trash," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "You didn't just betray me, you did it with her." Amelia, still trapped on the bed, whimpered in response. Her wide eyes were full of silent pleas, as if begging for some way out of this horrific scene, out from under the judgment of three men who had once thought they knew her. Lisa's mouth was occupied, but an apology was far from her thoughts. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock as they fixed on Jake, catching him red-handed in the moment. "Jake? Seriously? You absolute piece of trash," she spat. Lisa, Jake fumbled, struggling to find any coherent words. "You don't know? Is that what you're going to say?" she interrupted sharply, her voice heavy with scorn. "You seem to know exactly what you're doing, plastered to that filth." Jake, completely exposed, looked as if he wanted to melt into the floor, but there was no escape. He was frozen, utterly defenseless. Karen stormed forward next, her cheeks wet with tears but her fists clenched, filled with anger. She lashed out, landing a punch squarely on Rick's chest, close to where Mandy had already slapped him. It wasn't a powerful hit, but Rick still groaned, his body jerking, pulling Amelia awkwardly with him. "Damn you, Rick," Karen sobbed, her voice breaking apart. "After everything we've been through, this is how you repay me?" Rick barely managed a pitiful, "I'm sorry, babe." Chaos erupted all around them. The room buzzed with screams, sobbing, accusations, and insults hurled like weapons. Their betrayal was exposed, literally. And my unfaithful wife? She didn't even have the decency to say sorry. Her tear-streaked, swollen face only made her look more pitiful. Rick stayed glued to her, silencing her with his lips for once. But even if she could speak, I doubted it would be the apology I needed to hear. I stood there, arms folded, watching the mess unfold with a strange sense of detachment. Amelia squirmed, desperate for someone, maybe me, to step in and rescue her. Her gaze kept flicking toward me, but I wasn't about to be her savior. She could stay stuck for all I cared. Lisa's face twisted with fury, her words like venomous darts. "You filthy pigs! I gave you everything, and you're throwing it all away for this?" Jake kept his eyes down, mumbling half-hearted apologies, his words barely forming, but Lisa was done. "Shut up, Jake!" she barked, tearing the bedsheet off, as if stripping it would somehow erase the repulsive scene before her. Karen, meanwhile, was still screaming between her sobs, her fists pounding against Rick's back. "I hate you! You were supposed to love me!" "I do, Karen," Rick pleaded, his voice dripping with desperation. "Please, just let me explain." His body was still hunched awkwardly, pinning Amelia beneath him, unable to move. Mandy, pacing furiously, shot me a glare, her rage palpable. "How long have you known?" she demanded. "Long enough," I responded coolly, locking eyes with her before glancing at Amelia, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. "They're disgusting," Mandy muttered, her words soaked in revulsion. I gave a small nod. No argument from me. Suddenly, Lisa stormed over to the nightstand, grabbed the lamp and smashed it on the floor, sending glass shards flying. Jake flinched, probably bracing himself for the next blow. "You never deserved me," she hissed, her eyes burning with fury. Then she turned to me. "Michael, what are you going to do about this?" With calm indifference, I shrugged and pulled out my phone. "This," I said. I held up the phone, showing the recording I had started earlier. The flash reflected off Rick's tear-streaked face, his expression twisted in despair. "Please, Michael," he begged. Tom, still cowering in the corner like a beaten animal, whimpered pathetically. "Shut up." For the first time in what seemed like forever, my voice was steady, calm, even. It felt like mine again. "She made her choice," I said, motioning towards Amelia with my phone. "They all did." She shook her head frantically, but all it did was smear more of Rick's grime across her tear-streaked face. Her sobs were muffled now, which was honestly a welcome change. The pitiful excuses from the men were grating enough without her adding to the noise. Mandy's face twisted with disgust as she stared at Tom. "I'm divorcing you," she snarled, her voice sharp and final. "You're worthless." Nearby, Lisa kicked a chair out of her way, the screech of metal on the floor piercing through the room's thick tension. "You'll burn for this, Jake," Karen spat, her tears drying up, replaced by a fury that cut through the remaining grief. She wiped her face, her voice now icy. "You were never enough for me, Rick," she hissed, locking eyes with him. I see that now. I kept my distance, recording everything. There was no need to get any closer. The camera was capturing it all. The chaos, the tears, the desperate glances, and the feeble excuses drenched in self-pity. Amelia's terrified eyes met mine through the lens, silently begging for something. Mercy, maybe. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but they were swallowed by the weight of her guilt. For the past 10 minutes she had been repeating the same lines. I'm sorry, I love you. It was a mistake. But none of it was meant for me. Her tears weren't for the wreckage she had left in our lives, in our marriage, in the years we had shared. She was crying because she had been exposed. There was no hiding anymore. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. As the wives unleashed their fury, Mandy gripped Tom's hair with both hands, pulling hard. Lisa was lashing out at Jake, knocking over whatever she could reach in her rage. Karen's fists struck Rick, not hard enough to hurt him, but just enough to make him wince with each blow. Not one of them spared a glance at Amelia. She was exactly where she belonged. I took a step back. I had seen all I needed to see. The anger that had been boiling inside me for days was finally starting to cool. The worst part was over. It was time to leave. A sense of calm washed over me. I was done. Before I turned to go, I glanced back one last time at the mayhem behind me. Mandy ripping into Tom, Lisa in a fury, Karen still crying but resolute, and that hideous tangle of bodies on the bed, pieces of a nightmare I had finally pieced together. I descended the stairs, the shouting and chaos fading with every step, the weight on my chest growing lighter. By the time I reached the door, the cool night air hit me, and I took a long, deep breath. Outside, I got into my car and sat there for a moment. I glanced up at the house, at the nightmare it had become, and then I drove away. I didn't look back, not even once. The next morning I filed for divorce without hesitation. When I laid out the evidence for my lawyer, photos, videos, every sordid detail, his face went pale. Michael, this is extensive, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. I just shrugged. It was necessary. The divorce process was swift, brutal, and clean. Amelia didn't contest it. She couldn't. The evidence was irrefutable. In the end, she left with nothing. No home, no money, just the clothes on her back and the consequences of her choices. As for Tom, Jake, and Rick, their marriages went up in flames just as quickly. Mandy, Lisa, and Karen didn't waste a moment filing for divorce, severing all ties without a second thought. Last I heard, the men were living out of their cars, pariahs in a town that couldn't stop buzzing with gossip. Their lives were ruined, their reputations shattered. Our small town couldn't stop talking about it. Everywhere I went, people stared, their hushed voices trailing me like an unwanted companion. Did you hear about Michael's wife? Amelia? I never thought she'd sink so low. Those men should be ashamed of themselves. Their gossip lingered in the air, but I held my head high, refusing to let their words affect me. Let them talk. I had no reason to feel ashamed. Amelia had tried to reach out a few times, but I blocked her number without hesitation. One day she showed up at my door. Her face was streaked with mascara, tears streaming down as she pleaded for forgiveness. Without a second thought, I shut the door in her face. A week later, I was quietly enjoying a drink at the local bar when Tom, Jake, and Rick stormed in, their expressions twisted with fury as they made a beeline toward me. "You bastard!" Tom hissed, leaning in close. "You've ruined our lives." I calmly sipped my whiskey, unbothered. "Seems like you managed that yourselves when you all decided to sleep with my wife." Jake slammed his hand on the bar. "We deserve compensation for that glue stunt you pulled." I raised an eyebrow, amused. "Is that right?" Rick puffed out his chest, trying to look menacing. "Yeah, you either pay up or we're pressing charges. Assault, unlawful imprisonment, you name it," Tom added, his voice sharp with frustration. I couldn't help but chuckle at their pathetic attempt to scare me. "By all means," I replied, staring them down. "File those charges, I dare you, but don't forget I still have those videos. One click, and the whole internet will be watching your sorry asses. You'll be celebrities worldwide." Their faces drained of color. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "That's what I thought," I said, turning back to my drink. "Now get the hell out of here." They left, defeated, their bravado evaporated. I never saw them again. In the weeks that followed, the weight of Amelia's betrayal and the anger toward my so-called friends lifted. I sold the house, packed up my life, and decided it was time for a fresh start in a new place. On the day I left, I drove past the spots that once held meaning for us. The park where we had our first date, the restaurant where I proposed. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.